Hi, it's Reggie. Welcome back to Moonlight and Moments. Tonight's episode is about something we don't often talk about openly, the quiet fear that comes after we've tried something once and it didn't work out the way we hoped. Sometimes, failure doesn't arrive loudly, it doesn't slam doors or shatter dreams all at once. Sometimes it slips in quietly, like a shadow at the edge of the room, and it leaves behind something heavier than disappointment. It leaves hesitation, the kind that makes you pause before reaching for something you once loved, the kind that whispers, "What if it happens again?" The kind that convinces you that maybe it's safer not to try at all. And over time, that hesitation can start to shape the story we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of becoming. But tonight's story isn't really about failure. It's about what happens when the past seems to follow you into the present. When the things you thought you left behind begin to resurface in ways you can't quite explain. Some stories are written with intention, others seem to write themselves. So take a breath and let's begin. The library always felt different after closing. During the day, it carried the quiet rhythm of people, soft footsteps moving between shelves, whispered questions at the front desk, the gentle slide of books returning to their places. But at night, when the doors locked and the last light from the parking lot faded through the tall windows, the building seemed to settle into a deeper kind of silence, one that felt almost watchful. Ellie had worked the late shift for nearly a year. Most nights followed the same routine. We shelved the returns, tidy the desks, shut down the computers, and make one last walk through the aisles before turning off the lights. Predictable. And Ellie had learned to prefer predictable. Years ago, life hadn't felt that way. Back then, his nights were filled with something else entirely. Pages glowing on a laptop screen, stories spilling out faster than he could type them. The quiet thrill of believing that maybe, just maybe, those stories would matter to someone someday. He had believed he would be a writer, but belief is fragile when it meets disappointment. One rejection had turned into many. Emails that began politely and ended quietly. Some that never came at all. Eventually, the excitement faded, replaced by something heavier. Doubt. And slowly, almost without noticing, Ellie stopped writing. 7 years passed that way. The dream didn't explode or collapse. It simply went quiet. Ellie pushed the return cart deeper into the fiction aisle, sliding books back into their places. When he reached the final shelf, something caught his attention. A narrow gap between two novels, as if something had been tucked there deliberately. He reached inside and pulled out a thin black notebook. It had no title, no markings, just a smooth matte cover that felt strangely cold in his hands. "Someone forgot this," he murmured. He opened it. The first page held a single sentence written in neat handwriting. "Ellie hasn't written in 7 years." His stomach tightened. The words were unmistakably about him, and the handwriting looked disturbingly similar to his own. Ellie flipped to the next page, blank. The next, blank again. He let out a breath, shaking his head. Okay, weird. As he lowered the notebook, the overhead lights flickered once. Instinctively, he glanced back down. The page that had been blank was no longer empty. A new sentence had appeared beneath the first. He tells himself he doesn't miss it. A chill crawled up Ellie's spine, because that sentence was true. For years, he had told himself writing had only been a phase, that he had grown out of it, that it didn't matter anymore. But deep down, there were nights when the silence inside him felt heavier than any rejection ever had. Ellie turned the page quickly. Blank. He grabbed the pen from the desk and wrote across the paper, "This is a joke." For a moment, nothing happened. The lights flickered again. When he looked back at the page, another line had appeared beneath his. That's what he said the first time he was afraid to try again. Ellie felt the room tighten around him. The words didn't feel threatening. They felt precise. Like someone or something had been listening to the thoughts he never said out loud. He closed the notebook and stared at it for a long moment. "Fine," he whispered. Slowly, he opened it again and turned to the final page. A single sentence waited there. Tonight, he decides whether the story ends here. Ellie's chest rose and fell slowly. For years, he had told himself he had stopped writing because he failed. But standing there in the quiet library, he realized something unsettling. Failure hadn't been the thing that stopped him. Fear had. Fear that if he tried again, the disappointment might hurt even more the second time. Ellie picked up the pen. His hand trembled slightly as he turned to a fresh page. This time, the notebook didn't write anything. It simply waited. For the first time all night, the page stayed blank. Ellie stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly, he began to write the first sentence he had written in 7 years. And somewhere in the quiet building, the lights stopped flickering. The library was silent again. Not haunted, just still. And for the first time in a long time, Ellie realized something about the blank pages. They weren't endings. They were beginnings. Sometimes the things that haunt us aren't really ghosts. They're memories. Moments when we tried something with our whole heart and the world answered back with silence, rejection, or disappointment. Moments that quietly convicted us that maybe it was safer to stop reaching for certain dreams. For Ellie, the notebook in the library felt frightening because it seemed to know him. It saw the truth he had spent years trying to avoid. That he didn't stop writing because he stopped loving it. He stopped because it hurt. When we experience failure, especially in something we deeply care about, our minds begin to build quiet walls around that experience. Not to punish us, but to protect us. The brain remembers the feeling of embarrassment, rejection, or loss, and tries to make sure we never feel it again. So we adapt. We change our story. Instead of saying, "I was hurt," we begin saying things like, "It didn't matter that much anyway," or maybe it just wasn't meant for me, or "I've moved on." And sometimes those statements are partially true, but often beneath them lives something else. A quiet part of us that still wonders what might have happened if we had tried again. That's where the real tension of Ellie's story lives. The notebook isn't truly frightening because it predicts his future. It's frightening because it reflects his truth. It confronts him with the possibility that the thing he buried all those years ago might still be alive inside him. And that realization can be terrifying, because starting over doesn't require courage. It requires vulnerability. When we begin again after disappointment, we reopen the door to uncertainty. We allow ourselves to hope again, and hope after failure can feel almost dangerous. It asks us to believe that something different might happen this time, that maybe the ending isn't written yet. But here's the quiet truth hidden beneath Ellie's experience. The blank page at the end of the notebook isn't a test. It's an invitation. Life rarely hands us certainty. It doesn't guarantee success or recognition or the exact outcome we imagined when we first dreamed our dreams. What it offers instead is something quieter. Another chance to begin. The eerie presence in Ellie's story becomes peaceful the moment he picks up the pen again. Because the real hunting was never the notebook. It was the silence he allowed to grow around the part of himself that still wanted to create. And the moment he chooses to write again, that silence finally breaks. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't achieving something extraordinary. Sometimes it's simply allowing ourselves to return to the things we once loved, even when the past tells us we shouldn't. Because the past may shape our story, but it doesn't have to finish it. Ellie's story may feel mysterious, even a little unsettling, but the truth behind it is something many of us quietly recognize. Most of us carry a notebook of our own, not a literal one hidden in a library aisle, but a collection of memories that remind us of the moments when we tried something and it didn't unfold the way we hoped. Maybe it was a dream you once chased with excitement, a career you pursued, a creative passion you poured yourself into, or a goal that felt so personal it became part of your identity. At the beginning, everything felt alive with possibility. You could imagine the path forward clearly, and the future seemed open in a way that made your heart feel light. But somewhere along that journey, something shifted. Perhaps there was rejection. Perhaps someone doubted you. Perhaps life simply became complicated in ways you didn't expect. And slowly, the excitement that once fueled that dream began to fade. Sometimes we step away from those dreams intentionally. We tell ourselves we're being practical, realistic, responsible. Other times, the distance grows quietly without us noticing. 1 month turns into a year, and eventually it becomes easier not to think about the thing we once loved at all. But even when we move on, a small part of us remembers. It shows up in quiet moments, late at night, during a long drive, or when we see someone else doing the very thing we once imagined ourselves doing. That memory doesn't always feel inspiring. Often it feels uncomfortable because it raises a difficult question. What if I tried again? For many people, that question carries more fear than excitement. Not because the dream itself has lost its meaning, but because the memory of disappointment still lingers. Failure leaves an imprint. When we invest our time, energy, and heart into something that doesn't work out, it can make us question our abilities and our worth. The mind begins to associate that dream with pain, and as a result, we protect ourselves by avoiding it. We stop opening the notebook, we stop turning the page, but the truth is that avoiding that dream doesn't erase it. It simply leaves it unfinished. Ellie's experience in the library mirrors this internal struggle. The notebook seems eerie because it reflects the truth he's been avoiding for years. It reminds him that the story he believed had ended was never truly finished. It was simply paused. In real life, many of us have these paused chapters. A musician who stopped playing after criticism. An artist who packed away their paints after a difficult season. A writer who closed their laptop after too many unanswered submissions. And even beyond creative dreams, this pattern shows up in everyday life. Someone who stops pursuing relationships after heartbreak. Someone who abandons a goal after one difficult setback. Someone who decides it's easier to stay where they are rather than try risking again. But just like Ellie's notebook, life has a strange way of returning us to the things we once cared about. Not to punish us, but to remind us that unfinished stories still have the potential to continue. Sometimes those reminders arrive quietly, in a conversation, a memory, or a moment of stillness that makes us reconsider what we thought was over. And when that moment arrives, we face the same question Ellie faced in the library. Is the story truly finished? Or is the next page simply waiting for us to write it? If Ellie's story reflects something in your own life, you might be wondering what it means to begin again. Not in a dramatic way, not by immediately chasing the biggest version of the dream you once had, but simply by allowing yourself to open a door that had been closed for a long time. Starting again rarely looks the way we imagine it will. Many of us believe that returning to something we once loved requires a surge of motivation or confidence. We imagine that one day we will wake up feeling completely ready. But readiness is often quieter than that. Sometimes it begins with a small moment of honesty, a moment where you acknowledge that the thing you stepped away from still matters to you. That beneath the years of distance and practical decisions, there is still a spark of curiosity about what might happen if you tried again. That spark doesn't need to be loud. In fact, it often starts at something very small. Just like Ellie sitting at the desk in the quiet library, holding a pen over a blank page. He didn't need to write a masterpiece that night. He only needed to write one sentence. And sometimes, that is all starting again requires. One small step that reconnects you with something you once cared about. For a writer, that might mean opening a notebook and writing a few thoughts without worrying about whether they are good or bad. For a musician, it might mean picking up an instrument after years of silence and simply playing a familiar melody. For someone who once dreamed of building something new, it might mean revisiting an old idea and allowing yourself to explore it again, with curiosity instead of pressure. The important part is not the outcome, it's the willingness to return. When we release the expectation that everything must work perfectly this time, something interesting happens. The fear that once felt overwhelming begins to soften. The pressure to succeed fades just enough for creativity, joy, or exploration to return. Starting again becomes less about proving something to the world and more about reconnecting with the part of yourself that once felt alive while doing it. You don't need to rewrite the entire story of your life in a single moment. You only need to turn the page. And just like the notebook in Ellie's story, life doesn't always demand that we fill the page immediately. Sometimes it simply waits, patiently, quietly, for the moment when we're ready to pick up the pen again. Before we end tonight, take a moment to settle into the quiet around you. Wherever you are right now, allow yourself to pause for a few seconds. Take a slow breath in, and then gently let it go. Sometimes the world moves so quickly that we forget how powerful stillness can be. We move from task to task, responsibility to responsibility, rarely giving ourselves the space to listen to the quieter parts of our hearts. But those quiet parts often hold important truths. Just like Ellie standing in the silent library, sometimes life places us in moments where everything slows down, just enough for us to notice what we've been avoiding. Perhaps there is something in your life that once meant a great deal to you. A dream you carried for years, a passion that once made time disappear, an idea that used to fill you with excitement about what might be possible. And maybe somewhere along the way, that dream encountered disappointment. Maybe it didn't unfold the way you expected. Maybe life pulled you in another direction. Or maybe fear slowly convinced you that it was safer not to try again. If that's the case, take a moment right now to acknowledge the experience with kindness. You were doing the best you could at the time. And protecting your heart after disappointment is one of the most human instincts we have. But protection doesn't have to last forever. Just like the blank page waiting in Ellie's notebook, life often offers us small, quiet invitations to begin again. Not in a way that forces us, not in a way that demands perfection, simply in a way that reminds us we are still allowed to explore what matters to us. So as you sit with this moment, imagine a blank page in front of you. There is no pressure on that page, no expectations, no judgments, only possibility. You don't need to fill the entire page tonight. You don't need to know exactly where the story will lead. All that page asks is one simple thing: your willingness to begin. And maybe, just maybe, the next sentence of your life is waiting for you to write it. So take another slow breath, let your shoulders relax, And remember that every story, no matter how long it has been paused, always holds the possibility of another page. The things that scare us the most are often the things that still matter deeply to us. The dreams we once held, the passions we set aside, the stories we stopped telling. Those pieces of ourselves rarely disappear completely. Sometimes they simply wait, waiting for a moment of stillness, waiting for courage to return, waiting for us to remember that a blank page is not something to fear. It's something to begin. If tonight's story resonated with you, maybe you can carry one small question with you into the days ahead. What is one page in your life that might still be waiting to be written? You don't have to answer it all at once. Just remember that the story isn't over simply because it paused. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Follow Moonlight in Moments wherever you listen, and share it with someone who might need a little light today. Until next time, and as always, love yourself better than yesterday.
There's a place inside your heart where the silence learned to stay, where the dreams you once believed slowly drifted far away. You told yourself it's easier to leave those roads unknown, but the echo of your dreams never really lets you go. You remember how it felt when hope was in your hands. Now you're standing at the edge, afraid to try again. It's the quiet terror of hope when you've fallen once before, when your heart still wants to open, but you're guarding every door. Still a whisper in your soul says the story isn't closed. Even fear cannot erase the quiet terror of hope. Maybe dreams don't disappear, maybe they just learn to wait for the moment when your heart feels ready to create. Not the courage of the loud or the bravery of fire, just the strength to take one step toward the things that still inspire. You don't have to see the end or know where it will go. Sometimes healing simply starts by letting yourself hope. It's the quiet terror of hope when you've fallen once before, when your heart still wants to open, but you're guarding every door. Still a whisper in your soul says the story isn't closed. Even fear cannot erase the quiet terror of hope. Every ending leaves a mark, every loss can shape the heart, but the bravest thing we do is begin again in the dark. It's the quiet terror of hope, standing softly in the light, not demanding perfect answers, just the courage to try. And the dreams you thought were gone still remain.